So I think they are probably mostly.
Welcome to the August the 8th, 2022 meeting of the Sandusky City Commission. We'll have an invocation offered by Commissioner Murray, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
God of bounty, we thank you for this wonderful community and for all the people who call it home. We thank you for our first responders who protect us, for the planners who look into the future to make it better, for the men and women who work in the heat and cold to make certain that our streets are safe and our utilities are secure, for those who work to bring our parks, recreation, and joy to children young and old, and for those who work to support and guide our many departments. God of wisdom, help us to see each other as neighbors, both here in Sandusky and in Erie County and across the globe. We see the dangerous weather and change around our country and our earth, and we ask to be part of the solution. And we ask for great wisdom and courage for our leaders to help us and our planet. God of peace, we invite you, not Mr. Brady, to preside over this meeting. I know God has a sense of humor, so that's okay. Even if we arrive here tonight with different opinions, give us unity of spirit. Help us to each listen earnestly as others share their perspectives. Help us to work as a body in combining ideas for the long-term betterment of Sandusky and its citizens. Help us to work as a whole, rather than as individuals in pursuit of individual agendas. Bless us with a spirit of camaraderie in this room, secure in the knowledge that differences notwithstanding, we are traveling as colleagues on behalf of our shared mission. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ms. Myers, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray.
Here.
Mr. Brady.
Here.
Mr. Pajali.
Here.
Mr. Waddington. Mr. Harris. Mr. Meinzer.
Here.
Mr. Poole.
Here.
Commissioners, you have before you the minutes of our meeting. Excuse me, I think we need a motion to excuse Commissioner Harris from this meeting.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second discussion. Hearing no objection, that motion is approved. Hearing no objection, that motion is approved. Commissioners, you have before you the minutes of our meeting of July the 25th, 2022. What is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner
I
Waddington.
move that we accept the minutes of the July 25th meeting and dispense with the formal reading.
Second.
And a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, motion will be approved. And hearing no objection, that motion is approved. We have a proclamation regarding driving sober. In the absence of Commissioner Harris, who is our liaison to the police department, I will consider it an honor to deliver this proclamation. Whereas from August the 17th through September the 5th, 2022, law enforcement nationwide will be joining the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in the High Visibility Drive Safe, Sober, or Get Pulled Over campaign. And whereas officers in the Sandusky Police Department will show zero tolerance for drunk driving. And whereas, although it is illegal in all 50 states, the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, to drive drunk having a blood alcohol concentration of 0.08 or higher, far too many people across the nation get behind the wheel after consuming too much alcohol. And whereas every year, more than 1/3, 38% of all motor vehicle traffic deaths involve drivers who are drunk, and holidays like Labor Day are particularly dangerous. And whereas drunk driving takes a particularly heavy toll among young drivers. Whereas research has shown that high visibility enforcement, like the Drive Sober or Get Pulled Over campaign, reduces drunk driving fatalities by as much as 20%. And by joining this nationwide effort, Sandusky's roadways will be made safer for everyone throughout the Labor Day period. Whereas the Sandusky Police Department wants to remind everyone getting behind the wheel drunk is a terrible idea, and it impairs your ability to operate a vehicle safely, impairs your judgment and good sense about whether you can or should drive. And whereas driving drunk is simply not worth the risk. Now, therefore, I, Richard Brady, President of the Sandusky City Commission, do hereby proclaim and announce August 17th through September the 5th, 2022 as Don't Pay, Enjoy the Labor Day Holiday, Drive Sober or Get Pulled Over. Thank you. Any residents with comments regarding tonight's agenda, please step to the podium and share with us your name and address. And your thoughts on consent agenda items?
Thank you, Mr. President, City Commission staff. Tim Schwanger, 362 Sheffield Way. I have 3 items. First one is on item A, and I don't see our diversity manager here. I'll ask this question. It's the fireworks ordinance. Which ethnic groups are being excluded from this ordinance when it's compared to state law? I don't think that we have Cinco de Mayo listed. I might be wrong. Somebody will correct me, please. But we do have a decent-sized Hispanic ethnic participation in the city of Sandusky. So I was just wondering which ones are excluded from state law versus state law. Number 2 is consent item number H, which is the easement with Hidden Harbor Lagoons Association for the Sandusky Bay Pathway. In the supporting documents, it looks like this is right around 6/10 of an acre. And I guess the question would be $150,000 for 6/10 of an acre seems a little bit, well, not a little bit, but a whole bunch high, unless that property was able to be developed. And I don't think a small easement is probably able to be developed privately. Item number K, which is the sale of land bank property at 438 Camp Street. The supporting documents indicate that $100 per year will begin to be collected in real estate taxes. And my question would be is how much that 100% actually, or $100 actually, comes back to the city of Sandusky. So what can we expect in our coffers from that $100 annually? Same way with I think there's 2 items like that on the agenda, which would be letter L, which would be $150 a year, and exactly how much of that $150 a year comes back to the city. Thank you.
Any other residents with comments regarding agenda items?
Sharon Johnson, 1139 5th Street. I'd like to comment on a couple of these. The acquisitions, there's 4 acquisitions for the pathway tonight, totaling $274,000. It's on that consent rubber, I call it the rubber stamp item, consent. Maybe you could pull that off so we could discuss it, but that totals, the 4 acquisitions total $274,000, and it's coming out of the Issue 8 Parks and Rec. Now, that fund this year has $345,000 in the fund. So when you take that money out, there's $70,000 left in that fund, unless you're going to do a loan against this. I would like to know if you're taking it directly out of this fund or if you're going to do a loan against this, okay? And I would also like to comment on this Issue 8. This Issue 8 has gotten totally out of control. When we first went to the ballot on this to vote on it.
Ms. Johnson, are you commenting on Issue 8 or are you commenting on an agenda item?
This is part of it. This is part of Issue 8 and the parks thing here. Okay? Am I allowed to speak on that?
I'll give you the latitude to do it. This part of the resident section is designed for agenda items.
Right.
We have a section at the end of the
I know the
talk on any
rules.
item.
Okay. I just want to point out that we have added, since it was on the ballot, the people had certain things in mind on the ballot, and we passed it. Now we have extra things. We have programming, public arts, planning, special projects, facilities, vehicles, and equipment coming out of Issue 8. So this is morphed into something that we can't even recognize anymore. And I'm just wondering if that's legal to make extra categories on this beyond what the taxpayers voted on. And if that's not, maybe we need to make an amendment and go back to the taxpayers and ask them, do you want these extra categories on Issue 8? The next one is Monroe Street, the Health Department property. Where is the rental agreement to this? We haven't seen a rental agreement. Where is that and when's it coming up? We paid $100,000 for this lot, and I'm trying to get plans on this, and no plans are around. Paid $100,000 for a lot, and we don't know what the health department's going to put in on it. My last thing, and I have to say this, Mr. Brady, are you going to do the sign for the health department?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that we do.
You hope you do?
I hope that we do, yes. We're in business to sell signs.
Okay. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Mary Ann Schiff. I'm the president of the Harbor HOA, and I just wanted to make a couple of statements about the pathway and the easement that we hope is approved through the harbor and the lagoons. The harbor has taken it very seriously. The pathway coming through our gated community. I think I've been involved since sometime in 2017, maybe 2018, and to me, it's been a stellar process. We, as a board, found out that we had to have a two-thirds unit owner approval to sign an easement agreement. So we went through a vote. That vote, out of 188 unit owners, 164 voted. 148 yeses and 16 nos. We have very strong support. Leading up to that vote, we had meetings out in the field. So we invited anyone that wanted to come out and see where's the pathway really going to be. Walk that long stretch, I call it a candy cane, all the way out to the entrance. Aaron came out, environmental design came out. We answered lots of questions over many groups. I can, by memory, at least think of 6 different groups of residents that came out to see and ask questions. There's been some comments about all the trees that are coming down. I'd like to clarify that on the harbor property, we have a willow tree, 2 pines near the willow, and 1 medium large pine that's coming out of trees. Everything else is on somebody else's property, and any other comments today regarding all the trees, the 15 of this kind and the 15 of that kind, would be inaccurate information. We have many shrubs. We have 6 very large arborvitaes at our front entrance with a plan to re-landscape and redesign and re-envision our 37-year-old entrance, both entrance and exit side, after this project is complete. I think that might be all I have to say. We have strong support at the harbor for this.
Thank you, Ms. Schiff. You're welcome. Additional comments from residents regarding consent, regarding agenda items. Next on our agenda, we have a public hearing on rezoning of a property on Milan Road, and I believe that hearing is going to be conducted by our chief planner, Karen Blair. As this is a public hearing, questions both written or in person will be permitted at the conclusion of the hearing.
Thank you, Commission President Brady. I'll read the parcel numbers for this public hearing since they're not all attached to address. This is a public hearing to consider the rezoning of 4 parcels on Milan Road, 57-03542, 57-03541, 57-03374, and 57-00159. This was considered at the May 25th Planning Commission meeting, and they recommended approval of the rezoning. The rezoning would be from parcels zoned currently R140 single-family residential to general business. We put the slide in the slide deck so you can see and members of the public can see. One of the parcels is very skinny. It looks like 3, but it is actually 4 parcels. One of them was part of the existing parking lot that was attached previously to the business conducted on Perkins Ave, fronting Perkins Ave, and the other 2 were, the other 3 were residential. One of those properties have come down. The structure is no longer standing, and the building or the property owner would like to rezone this to business in order to make this a larger potential redevelopment site for business and market that as one site. So again, this is public hearing, so we want to open that up to
Comments or questions from anyone regarding this hearing?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
just one. I was reading through the paperwork you have. You consider this a blighted area or blighted something?
A blighted area?
It says blight, I'm going from what you've written, what was in the paperwork. It's either blighted but let me back up. What is this going to be when it's done?
So that's.
What are they going to do with this property?
I'm understanding your question. Thank you, Commissioner Poole, through the Commission President. The first bullet point that you're referring to is a correlation to the comprehensive plan, which states a reclaiming and repurposing of sites. We would consider this an underutilized site since it's largely utilized for parking. There's no current plans for new ownership or redevelopment that the Planning Division is aware of, but that statement that you're referring to is just coming out of the comprehensive plan considering rezonings and reutilization of property. We do believe that the extension of the business district is appropriate along Milan Road because it's a high traffic corridor and less appropriate for single family residential due to the traffic there, and general business is a good future use of that land.
Thank you.
Additional comments or questions? Mr. Wubser.
Really quickly, through Commission President Brady, kitty corner from this side and the township side is where the new Starbucks has been announced there. And I think traditionally when Starbucks goes into an area, it does provide opportunities at that intersection for additional development. So I see this as a positive that this site is potentially going onto the market where you're seeing some additional investment. And often on the north side of Perkins Ave, we don't have as deep of property lines because the residential pushes up toward Perkins Ave. So it's actually nice to see a site on the Sandusky side of Perkins Avenue that could potentially allow for a larger commercial development.
Seems to make sense tonight, judging from the lack of comments from the audience. It doesn't appear we have anyone objecting to this change, does it?
Mr. Chairman?
Commissioner Mike?
I'd like to say that, and I was thinking, it is underutilized, and I have family members, Balcones grew up on that road, and it's just not conducive to residential anymore, and the only concern, and I'm sure Mr. Klein and Mrs. Blair are all over this, but as long as we keep some lanes of egress that you're not coming in enough in 250, I'm all for rezoning this.
Additional comments or questions from residents or from commission? If not, I'll declare this hearing closed. Thank you, Ms. Blair.
Thank you.
Commissioners, you have before you several communications from staff recommending various legislation. Can I have a motion to accept these communications?
So moved.
Second.
And a motion and a second discussion. Without objection, the motion will be approved. Hearing no objection, that motion is approved. We're going to adjust our agenda slightly this evening by moving the 13 consent agenda items to be acted upon after the new business section of our agenda. At that point, any consent items may be heard as regular agenda items. We'll turn to our regular agenda now. Ms. Myers, we present item number 1, which is a first reading. Maybe it is not a first reading. It is a second.
Yes, Mr. President.
Just a regular.
Item 1, rezone Sandusky Holdings 2609 and 2613 Milan Road. It is requested an ordinance be passed amending the official zone map of the City of Sandusky to rezone parcel number 57-03542, 57-03541, 57-03374, 57-00159, located at 2609 and 2613 Milan Road from R140 Single Family Residential District to General Business District, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect under suspension of the rules as contained and in accordance with Section 13 of the City Charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner White.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 13 of the City Charter.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion. Got about as much discussion now as we had in the hearing. Ms. Myers, you call the roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And that ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, will you present item number 2, please?
It is requested an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Erie County Land Reutilization Corporation for the demolition of a structure located at 3201 West Monroe Street, Sandusky, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meisner.
I move that we accept this ordinance in full accordance with Section 14 City Charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
and this is the project for putting up a sign in place of a property out on Monroe Street, sign for the Health Department. I was opposed to it at the beginning, and for the same reason, I cannot go along with this. I think it's a inappropriate use of $100,000 of CDBG money. We've stretched the limits of what the regulations allow, because that area is not even included in the area of town that's considered to be eligible for use of CDBG funds. I understand that there's a loophole that allows public projects, and stretching because this is not our project at all. So, and the county does not own the property because the law doesn't allow them to buy it. So us circumventing all those, what I consider to be safety mechanisms for the use of taxpayer money we seem to be going around them. Additionally, so I'm going to continue to object to this, and I'm going to have to vote no. One other thing. In terms of priorities, we have a property over on Adams Street, the Doghouse Bar. That neighborhood's been waiting a long time for the blight to be removed from that, the problems that caused by that bar. And for us to ignore that and move forward with this project on the drop of a dime, I think is inappropriate, so I'll vote no. Thank you.
Mr. Howlett, I think there is a question regarding the lease on this property, and which makes us, the city, completely whole on this purchase over a period of 5 years. I understand that your office is preparing that document now.
That's correct. We're working with the Erie County Health Department and anticipate bringing a subsequent piece of legislation memorializing, if City Commission approves it, memorializing a lease that would repay the city for 100% of the outlay for purchasing the property. And this piece of legislation is the first of a couple partnerships I think we're working on for demolition with the land bank, one of which, to Commissioner Poole's point, we hope to bring soon is actually an MOU for the Doghouse Bar as well. These things take a little bit of time. And this one's first in the pipeline.
Mr. Chairman, just to add to what the law director said, the demolition will be done through a partnership with the county, and it's partnerships like this that make our relationship with the county stronger and allow us to take on activities like this. And by the way, the demolition will be done by the Erie County Land Bank at their cost. So I just wanted to point that out.
Additional comments, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray?
just one point. I've spoken on this before, so I won't be long on it. But the Erie County Health Department provides a tremendous service to so many of our residents. This is designed to make it more visible and to get more people in there. I think that makes a huge difference in the quality of people's lives. And I understand the concerns, but all in all, I think this is a smart project.
Mr. Chairman, and just to refresh our memory, Mr. Holliday, maybe you could tell us that this is more than a sign project, right?
That's correct. In addition to the sign, removal of the building increases visibility of the health department facilities, and we're also intending to partner with the health department to install public access, so some type of public walkway, whether it's a sidewalk or a walking path. And those are the pieces of the plan that are being finalized at this time. But correct, in addition to signage, it's also about visibility and pedestrian access to this important public facility here in our community.
Thank you.
Ms. Myers, you call a roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Bajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
That ordinance is passed. Mrs. Myers, you present item number 3, please.
It is requested an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a contract with FurPal Construction USA LLC of Taylor, Michigan for the Tiffin Avenue 12-inch water main lighting project and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Meiser?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance 614 of City Charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Mr. Klein, I presume you're not bringing Josh down here to do a show and tell on how lining works again.
I can see if he's available.
Please do not. Additional comments or questions on this legislation, Commissioners? Ms. Byers, you call a roll on that motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Byers, you present item number 4, please.
It is requested in a resolution authorizing and directing the city manager to file an application with the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency for a loan through the Water Pollution Control Loan Fund program for the design of the Mills Street Irate District Treatment Project and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this resolution, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner
I
Waddington?
move for the adoption of this resolution under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, you call a roll on that motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the resolution.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That resolution is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item number 5, please.
It is requested an ordinance authorizing the submission of an application by the city manager for the financial assistance and to enter into a project agreement with the Ohio Public Works Commission in order to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission's state capital improvement and/or local transportation improvement programs authorized by Chapter 164, Aid to Local Government Improvements of the Ohio Revised Code for the Milan Road Concrete Repair Project and declaring this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this resolution, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole?
move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Pajali?
I would just like to comment that I'm glad to see that this is getting done. I know a lot of people were upset. They thought it was going to get done with that Route 250 project, and for some reason, ODOT came up short on the funding. So I'm glad to see that we're finally getting this done.
Additional comments, Commissioners? Ms. Myers, you call a roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the resolution.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That resolution is passed. That concludes our regular agenda. We'll turn to our city manager for his report.
Thank you, Commission President, Commissioners, audience, and staff. First, before I get started, I just want to welcome back John Orzek, who was out for a few meetings, and, you know, we were all worried for him and pulling for him, but very happy to see him get back in one piece and back in that chair. So welcome back, John. Also, moving on to new and old business with Public Works, the intersection of Barker and Broadway Streets will transition to a four-way stop starting on August 16th. Advanced warning signs have been posted to give motorists early notice, and this was in response to several citizens who petitioned for this change due to what they viewed as high speed or dangerous conditions. And I know Chief Oliver worked closely with Public Works to monitor that was in fact a dangerous intersection before this change went into place. Also, the contractor installing concrete at Shoreline Park and the Marina plans to mobilize on Monday, August 15th, 2022. And the sidewalk program's contractor will mobilize to begin work on Monday, August 15th, 2022. The resurfacing contractor continues work on adjusting castings and intends to begin paving additional streets, including CDBG streets, by the end of the month. And finally, for Public Works, 2 requests for qualifications have been advertised. The first is for design of a second natural wetland system in Sandusky Bay, and the second is for design of Sheldon's Marsh, so it can finally be used as a secondary intake. Staff will bring both contracts to a future commission meeting for your consideration after consultant selection is complete. Moving on to community development. The Rental and Mortgage Assistance Program has processed 10 more mortgage applications. Up to 3 months of rental or mortgage assistance can be covered through the program. Applications must be able to show a hardship stemming from COVID. If you're interested in applying, please go to www.cacehr.org. Again, that's www.cacehr.org. Paper copies are available at the Community Action Commission of Erie, Huron, and Richland counties, or at City Hall. And finally, and I'll refer this to the law director to give a little bit more detail. As many know, the city recently received petitions for the submission of a proposed charter amendment. As is required, the city is submitting these petitions for signature verification. Additionally, the city is required to review the petitions to ensure they comply with all the procedural requirements. Upon review by our law department and outside counsel, it was determined that the petitions are flawed and that the city cannot submit these petitions to the Board of Elections for the November ballot. I would ask our law director now provide a more detailed explanation regarding the challenge with the petitions.
Thank you. On August 3rd, 2022, the city received petitions for the submission of a proposed charter amendment that from appearances seeks to change the process for how cities use park property to benefit our residents. The city is required to do 2 things at this time. It is required to submit for the signatures for verifications to the Board of Elections, and we're in the process of doing that, which gives us the total number of verified signatures. Additionally, the city has to review the submitted petitions to make sure they follow all the procedural requirements laid out by the Ohio Constitution, our charter, and Ohio statutory law. We've reviewed those in the legal department, and we also asked outside legal counsel to take a look to make sure we were covering everything and checking. And both the legal department and our outside legal counsel have come to the same conclusion, and that is, upon review, the petitions do not meet the legal requirements necessary to submit the proposed charter amendment to the Board of Elections for the ballot. Specifically, the petition does not contain a full and correct copy of the text, which is required by Ohio law and our charter. Petitions must strictly comply with this requirement in order to be placed on the ballot. The petitions received by the city do not, as it only includes 2 sentences of potential new or amended language and not the full text of the proposed change. This legally binding requirement is to make sure a proposed amendment fairly and substantially presents the issue to electors in order to avoid misleading them. The law incorporates basically a common sense way to make sure that the voters, when they receive ballot language, can understand what is being changed by the proposed amendment. The proposed amendment clearly violates this requirement. As written, it's unclear if the amendment is meant to add language, repeal language, replace language, and it's unclear what, if anything, is supposed to be included. Therefore, the city will not be submitting these for inclusion on the ballot. Obviously, the city welcomes and encourages active citizen participation in our local self-governance, including submission by citizen groups of charter amendment. The city also has a charter review commission and process specifically for this purpose. The city encourages residents interested in changes to our charter to engage in that charter review process, as it is the best way to ensure the amendments achieve the goals of the community and also comply with any necessary legal requirements in order to actually be placed on the ballot.
Thank you, Mr. Howe.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Poole.
Mr. Howe, could you be more specific about what you're talking about that wasn't correct, so we know what you're talking about? I understand you said it was insufficient in all those words. What sentences, what describe what you're talking about, if you would.
The Ohio Revised Code, which is incorporated specifically by our charter, requires that there be a full copy of the text seeking to be amended included in a proposed amendment to a charter. this does not include the full copy of the text of Section 25 as required by law.
They didn't restate the charter. Is that what you're saying? It's not about a problem with what they asked, whatever it is. I haven't seen it, so-
We do not review for the actual policy change. We only review for procedural requirements.
So they were supposed to repeat Section 25 of the charter, and they did not do that. Is that what you're saying?
They would have had to include a full text of whatever amendment they're seeking to.
Could you give us, read the example of what you're talking about and tell us what's missing, if you would?
I'm a little loath to get into specific details and provide legal counsel in this public meeting.
You can loathe all you like. The point is, you're asking us, you're telling us that something citizens presented, and I haven't seen it, so I don't know what it says, that it was insufficient. Now, I don't even know how many people signed it. But you're asking us to accept it, so just, would you give us read, what are you talking about? We shouldn't leave here.
Commissioner Poole, I think our law directors explained that what they're missing was they had to cite the entire section that they wanted to be appealed, and they did not do that. Now, I don't know how you can get any more specific than that.
That's what I asked him. Is that what you said? Section?
Yes, that's what I've said twice.
I mean,
You could have
perhaps
said
you
yes
didn't
to me
just
when I
hear it.
asked you the exact same thing. I do say yes when I asked that.
Well, you got it from an
I
electrical
did.
contractor.
Great. All right, there you go. Thank you. So they simply didn't, all right, got it.
Does that conclude your report, Mr. Wobser?
Yes, I'm happy to take comments or questions.
Questions or comments for our city manager? We'll move to items of old business. Any items of old business? We'll move to items of new business. Any items of new business?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington.
I'd like to make a motion to have a proclamation for Susan Weber Zier for the burn pits legislation and honoring Heath Robinson, her son-in-law. When everybody else gave up, she kept battling. I don't know how many times she went to Washington, Toledo with the Captain's office, and I think we should at least, you're the mayor, and I would suggest that we recognize her at a public meeting. That is something that a lot of people couldn't withstand.
Very appropriate.
You know, I mean, she walked through some fire, and it's the Veteran Health Care Bill, the PACT Act. I think it gets passed tomorrow, Wednesday, the final passage, but it's a done deal. But you got to respect somebody like that. Right here from Sandusky, when I'd watch CNN or read, I get the Plain Dealer and other newspapers I read, articles in there, and she was just a bulldog, and from Sandusky, and I think folks like that need to be recognized.
She appeared before this commission, before a commission on a couple of different occasions. We were in another building at that point in time, but I think it's a very appropriate request, and I'll ask our clerk to begin that process of putting together a proclamation for that purpose. Thank you for the suggestion.
You know, and I look at it, how many people in here or up here could do that or fight that fight? You know, think about it. Relentless, a bulldog from Sandusky, Ohio. And I know her not real well, I know who she is, but I mean, that, to me,
Awesome.
that says a lot about a person going through the battle in the arena. I call it, a lot of people couldn't do it. They could get to the doorstep, but they couldn't push it open. That says a lot about her character.
Great suggestion. Additional items of new business.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
I'd appreciate it if the staff would investigate what it would take for us to, and what it would cost to do upgrades at our railroad crossings so that the trains don't have to blow the horns going through town. Vermillion has this, it's taken care of us for years. It would be an improvement to the quality of life of folks, and as long as we have $20 million, $18 million in COVID money, I'd like to see a little bit, that be considered something we'd look at, whether we do one railroad crossing at a time, or if we can afford to do more than once. I think it's worth looking at.
Commissioner Poole, are you talking about the trains not blowing their horns?
Yes.
Wow.
You upgrade, yes, it's a matter of upgrading the crossing so that you can't cross.
Okay.
And it's a positive, I think it's a positive thing for the community and
Mr. Klein, you looking at
all
that?
along the line.
Engineer, you looking at that?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray?
it seems like this issue came up once before, at least. And my guess is Mr. Klein has some costing relatively accessible. It requires that you have 4 gates
Yes.
instead of the 2.
Yeah.
And it was pretty expensive, as I recall, because the federal government requires you to do it a certain way. But, I mean, I think looking at it one at a time over a long-term period, that could make some sense.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
as
Mike.
I recall, and when we were doing the bike path in the west end out towards Over Monroe and out over Edgewater, that we did approve a significant amount of money for the bike path with some train crossing stuff. So I think Mr. Klein's been moving forward on that.
Sure. Good suggestion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Jolly?
I believe those areas are called railroad quiet zones. And I know Vermillion got some funding for that a few years back. And I think that was through Marcy Captor's office. I think there is available funding through ODOT and Federal Highway, and maybe Mr. Klein could look into that. There's a lot of requirements as they come through a city that the railroad has to do when you have one of these designated quiet zones in place.
Additional items of new business.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray?
I'll make a motion to set an executive session regarding real estate purchases.
Second?
Been a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, you poll the commission on that motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
We do.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to set a second executive session regarding litigation.
Second?
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Is that for tonight, too?
It is.
Ms. Myers, you poll the commission on that motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That motion is set, and both those executive hearings are set. We will move into executive session by vacating this room because we have such a large audience. We don't want to disturb you folks by moving you out of this room. So we are going to move to the second floor immediately and conduct both of these executive sessions, and then we're going to return and do our consent agenda items. We'll be back.
We're going upstairs?
Yeah.
Okay. Y'all don't have to leave.
Ever since you were out swimming in the water?
I don't know what it was.
Just the sewer litigation. It'll be the last thing we do. That'll be a regular agenda.
You were out there swimming.
I was watching. That was the problem.
Yeah.
You were in a case.
So
I'm looking for the agenda.
yours. So what do we regard as being uncontroversial? Put it down, see if you regard.
Anything that says
How did you identify it?
Well, they'll have the donation, we don't.
You just looked around, see if people were having an issue.
That's not
Swimming?
controversial. The donation.
Easements.
Yeah, so I would say A through D.
Is okay. C, D, E. Easement starting E.
We're just going to bring down so we know what you're doing.
E through I.
I see. Why is that a controversial?
Easements.
Donation.
Okay, not controversial. Right, not controversial. E
So
through H.
remove
G, H, and I.
E through
E.
H.
Why is I controversial? It's a
You could-
donation.
Yeah, you can drop it. Only because I
so-
want to thank her for the donation.
So you, I see.
E, F, G, and H. are the
E,
one-
F, G,
those are
E,
the
F,
ones
G,
that are
and H. So
controversial.
why don't you take E, F, G, and H off?
You guys can do it. You started
We'll
it.
let
Tell him to
we'll
do
let
it.
the
It's all right.
record reflect that we've returned from executive session at 6:20. Back in open session. Commissioners, we have 13 items on the consent agenda. Do any of you wish to move any of those items to the regular agenda?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
move, I think it's E, F, G, and H.
E, F, G, and H will go to a consent, will go to a regular agenda and off the consent agenda. Ms. Myers, will you present the consent agenda less items E, F, G, and H?
Yes, Mr. President. Item A, amendment of fireworks codified ordinance. This is the second reading. Item B, permission to sell Onan generator. This is the second reading. Item C, Erie County Senior Center Meals on Wheels Program Agreement. D, Father's Heart Family Church Youth After School Care Program Agreement. Item I, easement with Sandusky Star Lanes for Sandusky Bay Pathway. Item J, accepting parcels donation from Firelands Regional Medical Center for Hayes Ave project. Item K, land bank sale of 438 Camp Street. Item L, land bank sale of 527 McDonough Street. Item M, 2022 sewer lining project first and final change order.
Commissioners, having heard these ordinances, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
I move for the passage of all of the items on the consent agenda pursuant to the section indicated in the communication itself.
Second.
So a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, will you call a roll on the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington? Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinances.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Those ordinances are passed. Ms. Myers, you present item E, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Item E, number 1, it is requested an ordinance be passed approving a temporary easement granted to the city by Stanley T. Runkle and Todd M. Runkle for the Sandusky Bay Pathway as part of the landing project and declaring this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
There are 2 ordinances in this piece of legislation. Commissioners, we will handle them one at a time. Having heard that ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray.
move for the passage of item E1 pursuant to section 14 of the city's charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Poole.
dealing with all of these items, I have the same concern, and there's little point in belaboring it. I believe that the amount of money that we're paying for these easements for use of property that is of absolutely not being used at all by any of those folks on here, Star Lanes, is donating theirs, which I applaud them doing that, donating that use. I consider that to be a true civic thing to do for the community. And for the others that are making, I think we have about $270,000 in total, roughly, to just to pay for the right to go utilize these, to put this bike lane through properties that the property owners have indicated that they're in support of. It will likely to improve their property values, at least I assume. I'm not sure what their assessment of why they want it, but the amount of money that we're paying for the use of this, I think, is exorbitant. State of Ohio is willing to put this bike path on Cleveland Road where there's already space existing. And so I think when this was a state project that they were going to provide us with grant money to fix it, it was a grand idea. Taking money out of issue 8 and from our general fund, capital fund, to fund something that a minimal number of citizens are going to benefit from, I think is probably not wise at this point. So for those reasons, I'll be voting no on all of them, and now I've saved you having to talk about it, each one individually.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Murray.
A couple of thoughts I'd like to share on this. First of all, this is one of these things where you don't really know how the utilization is going to be until it occurs. There's no way to totally predict that. I've watched the pathway explode in usage in front of my own office building. It's just phenomenal. You have to be very, very careful leaving the parking lot anymore because there are so many bikers, scooters, and walkers. It's just a wonderful thing to see. Compared to when we built that building 29 years ago, it was dead. Nobody was walking downtown. And I think there are a lot of things that account for that, but the fact of the pathway there is one. Two, yes, this is a significant amount of money, but it needs to be put in some context. We've paid almost $2 million, and maybe a little better than $2 million, to design and engineer this project and negotiate these purchases one by one by one by one. It is a long, tedious process. I'm thankful for the people who have done that work. We are at the verge of having something truly incredible. The staff and the voters have worked for years to get us to this point. We're getting closer. It's not one of these things that happens overnight. You have to have a long-term commitment. This goes back to a point in time when there were city managers who were now since long retired, who initiated some of these plans. The pathway was something that we were talking about back in 2006, as I recall, and I think that had been discussed even before that, in different manifestations, but it was discussed. And I think that we are proceeding in the right direction with this, and I think that, yes, you could carve out a piece of the highway, and you could put a bike lane on the highway, but that's not where people want to ride their bikes. It's not something that adds economic value to the area. It's not something that attracts visitors and homeowners alike to live here. This is the right thing for Sandusky's future, and so I'll be voting in support of these various acquisitions.
Additional comments or questions, Commissioners?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Jolly.
I think that was well said by Mr. Murray. And the fact that we brought in somebody professional to determine value, I guess that's what is the deciding factor in my mind. We just didn't come up with these numbers. We did have a professional company come in and determine value.
Additional comments, Commissioner? It's been a long, tedious process, and I'm not just speaking of this piece of legislation, but I'm speaking of really all 5 of them, including the donation by Star Lanes. But this has been a give and take on the part of a lot of homeowners and associations and a lot of private owners of singular properties, and a lot of work on the part of Aaron Klein and his staff and the people that we've paid to do this. We are not there yet, but we are inching forward on this commitment. And it is a commitment. At the end of the day, and I'm not sure all of us will be here to see the end of the day, but at the end of the day, I'm hopeful that we'll look back on this and be judged to having made wise decisions at providing this for not just residents, but for tourists and visitors alike. There's a lot of good work yet to be done, but our thanks go out to Mr. Klein for pulling this together. Ms. Myers, if you call a roll on the motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item E, number 2, please.
It is requested an ordinance be passed approving a permanent easement granted to the city by Stanley T. Runkle and Todd M. Runkle for the Sandusky Bay Pathway as part of the landing project and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Murray?
I move for the adoption of ordinance number E2 pursuant to Section 14 of the city's charter.
Second.
Motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, you call a roll on that motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item F, please.
Item F, number 1, it is requested an ordinance be passed approving temporary easements granted to the city by 1 Perkins Place for the Sandusky Bay Pathway as part of the landing project and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Waddington?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance, 1, under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
And a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, you call the roll on that ordinance.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item F, number 2, please.
It is requested an ordinance be passed approving an easement granted to the city by 1 Perkins Place for the Sandusky Bay Pathway as part of the landing project and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, what is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve ordinance number 2 under Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, you call a roll on that ordinance, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
That
No.
ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item G, please.
It is requested an ordinance be passed approving an easement agreement granting a perpetual permanent easement and temporary easement to the city by the Harbor Homeowners Association Incorporated for the Sandusky Bay Pathway as part of the landing project and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Meiser?
I move to adopt this ordinance under Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman, what was the cost of that?
Item G was, I believe it's $40,000. It's $40,885, is that correct, Mr. Klein?
It's 40,900.
$40,900.
Okay, thank you. I got lost here.
Ms. Myers, you call a roll on that motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
That ordinance is passed. Ms. Myers, you present item H, please.
It is requested an ordinance be passed approving an easement agreement granting permanent and temporary easements to the city by the Hidden Harbor Homeowners Association, DBA hidden harbor lagoons for the city Sandusky Bay Pathway as part of the landing project and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner
I
Waddington.
move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion. Ms. Myers, you call roll on that motion, please.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
No.
That ordinance is passed. Mr. Heil, do you have a piece of legislation for us to consider?
I do. I believe I gave it to Ms. Myers.
Ms. Myers has another piece of legislation for us to consider.
Yes, I do. An ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a settlement agreement with releases of the parties and Third Amendment to the Sewer Services Agreement with Erie County and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this ordinance, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Meinzer.
I move for adoption of this ordinance under full suspension of the rules in accordance with Section 14 City Charter.
Second.
Got a motion and a second discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to say that I appreciate all the hard work that was put into getting this done by you and Mr. Waddington and other members of the staff, and just I applaud the work that you did. And I hope this opens things up where we have better relations, warmer relations with the county, and we continue in this same path.
Mr. Pajali, I thank you for those kind words, but I would like to point out, and I'd like written into the record, that as one of your campaign promises, you came to me and asked if you could begin a dialogue with the county. And I turned both you and Commissioner Waddington loose on the county, and I will always feel that one of the products of your visits there started the ball rolling in this direction. So thanks to both of you for starting that process.
I think Mr. Waddington softened him up.
Mr. Chairman,
Good point, Mr. Murray.
I'm pretty sure I heard the county commissioners say uncle after
They
that.
said they gave up. That's what they did, yeah. Ms. Myers, will you call a roll on that motion, please?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Murray?
Abstain.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance.
Mr. Murray?
Abstain.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Pajali?
Yes.
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Mr. Meinzer?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
That ordinance is passed and that lawsuit is put to rest. I believe that concludes our regular agenda. We will, out of order, we will turn to time in our meeting to give our residents an opportunity to speak on any item regarding city business. Any residents regarding speaking on city business?
Greetings, everyone. Tom Lamarca, 206 48th Street. Just curious, in the manager's report regarding East Water Street reconstruction of $85,856 for an amendment to the Sandusky bike pathway between, Franklin and Meigs. I mean, that's already there. We're already using it. It's already painted. Why are we spending $85,000 for that? Just curious. And then the other one, I often see references to Carpenter Marty and his evaluation of things. Who's Carpenter Marty? Just curious. Thank you.
We'll have staff get you answers for those.
Pardon me?
We'll have staff get you answers for those.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I can't give you a real detailed answer, but I believe that bike path that you're referring to was part of a project that was submitted to the MPO, so that's part of the costs that went along, the 20% that the MPO, I believe, had improved. And Carpenter Marty, they're consultants, I believe, out of Columbus, and they were retained by ODOT to do some work, and they've on the Route 4 corridor. So that was their role in a lot of this, the planning of it.
We don't usually get answers that quickly. Thank you, Mr. Bajali.
I have them on top of my head.
Additional comments from residents regarding any item, city business? Not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We're adjourned.